Happy Aloha Friday! Welcome to the final day of the 26th AMOS Conference presented by Maui Economic Development Board. Please welcome Ian Christensen's Secure World Foundation to introduce this morning's fireside conversation.
Good morning, everyone. So welcome to the third day of the conference, the third day of the Policy Forum. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Rather than the standard individual keynote, we wanted to try a fireside chat format for today's opening keynote. And I want to start that by just setting the stage a little bit. So in June 2018, the first Trump administration issued Space Policy Directive 3, which directed that the Department of Commerce would take over the public spaceflight safety data and services function, take that over from what was then the Department of Defense, while the DoD would continue to maintain the authoritative catalog of space objects. Under both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, the Office of Space Commerce worked to implement SPD3 through developing the developing the TRAC system, so the Civil Space Traffic Management System within the Department of Commerce. TRAX is expected to reach its initial full production release in January of 2026. However, as we sit here today, there's a certain amount of policy and budgetary uncertainty around the future of TRAX. In the FY 2026 budget request from ONB and from the White House, that proposed terminating all funding for TRAX and basically directing that the private sector take on that function. The Senate Appropriations language restores full funding for TRAX and essentially directs OSC to explicitly continue implementing it. The House budget language right now suggests about $50 million in appropriations for OSC for TRAX, but directs a little more attention back on DoD systems rather than setting up what the House described as duplicative capabilities. Along with this, in August of this year, the White House issued an executive order that directed Office of Space Commerce, Department of Commerce to take on what we call the mission authorization function, and also proposes elevating OSC to the Office of the Secretary within the Department of Commerce. So this creates just a little bit of uncertainty about where the future of the TRAX program is going, what level of appropriation it will have, what its functions are, and then how it relates to the broader policy role that the Office of Space Commerce has. Our speakers today are veterans of the policy work implementing SPD3. Is that appropriate? I think that's a good description, right? Implementing SPD3 across multiple U.S. administrations. So I want to introduce the three speakers today. They are Kevin O'Connell, who is the founder and CEO of Space Economy Rising and was the director of the Office of Space Commerce during the first Trump administration. Diane Howard is a senior strategy advisor at MITRE and the principal at Sur l'Espace, I hope I got that right, and was the Director for Commercial Space Policy at the National Space Council during the Biden administration, and also serves as a Chief Counsel for Commercial Space, or for Space Commerce, at the Department of Commerce under the first Trump administration. And Richard DalBello is the principal at RDB Space and was the Director of the Office of Space Commerce during the Biden administration. The session today is titled Reflections on the Evolution of U.S. Policy for STM. If I'd picked that title today, it might have been something a little more evocative, perhaps, TRAX, where do we go from here? But we want to have a discussion with our three experts about kind of pathways and options for resolving the uncertainty we see today, and then what that might mean for the viability and future of the commercial SSA industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to the three of you. Oh, and sorry, I did forget to mention, Rich, Diane, and Kevin will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take a few questions. So do submit questions through the app. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back here at AMOS and as well with our colleagues online. It's only the stalwarts that show up for a policy discussion at 7:30 in the morning, by the way. So we're thrilled to have you here with us as well as online. Ian started with SPD3, and of course, I've said on this stage before, my announcement at the White House in June of 2018 coincided with the announcement of SPD3, so I've always had a bit of an affinity for it. If we look at it as a policy, on the one hand, it's pretty much withheld the test of time, an urgent problem that needs a very innovative set of solutions. And in SPD3, it talks about leveraging a whole of government U.S. approach, whole of U.S. government approach, leveraging our international partners, and of course, harnessing the innovation of the private sector. And so on the one hand, the policy has held up. On the other hand, it means we've only made some progress toward the ambitions of SPD3. So, ideally, a good policy decays when you've completed the work. We haven't completed the work at this point. And so we're looking at what has to happen to move this forward. Again, there's been some good work done by all. Again, we share that common bond on this stage. I often look at this, because of my history, I look at this world through the lens of what went on in the evolution of the commercial satellite imagery world that I've looked at for 30 years. And I think there are similarities in a good direction. I think there's similarities in a bad direction. And I would say one of the key differences here is the extent to which there is a very wonderfully diverse, robust ecosystem of commercial companies that is ready to step up in this area. Some have been given an opportunity so far, but I don't think we've taken full advantage of that to confront this urgent problem. And so I'll start there, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'll jump in there. I think one of the couple of big questions jump out now about what's going on with the TRACS program. The first is where did the hostility to the program come from? And because this was, of course, originally a Trump one program. So what changed to cause the change of heart? And where are we going with this? So the change, I think, was driven more by budget decisions at the White House than by policy decisions. And it's important to focus on that, because in the past, several administrations, we've had either very well-organized space policy apparatus in the Space Council or a similar structure in the National Security Council. And I think today we don't have either of those in place in the Trump administration. Now, it's very possible that they will do something like that in the future, but they don't have it today. So large questions like, where are we going on space traffic control? Are we doing the Artemis program? What are we doing in allied space? A lot of these issues don't have a natural focal point in the administration yet where these issues are being discussed. So we see kind of what looks like some disorganized decision making. So we have a budget decision coming out of OMB. At the same time, the National Economic Council is saying something very strongly in favor of the Office of Space Commerce. And then the Hill, both House and Senate, have differing viewpoints. So there isn't today this coherence that we might have seen. Again, it's still early days in the administration. It's quite possible that they'll do something like that in the future. And next year, when you come back, the head of the National Space Council might be sitting here talking to you. So the other thing is kind of where are we going? And I think I agree with Kevin that the policy direction that was established was a good one. It actually predated the first Trump administration. People were concerned about these issues in advance of the first Trump administration, and I think the SPD3 was a very good document, and I think it will stand the test of time. And so basically the basis of that document is we want the warfighter to be focused on one set of concerns in space, and we want the civil community to have an advocate for safety and sustainability in a different part of our government. We're big enough and sophisticated enough to handle both those thoughts at the same time. And I think that you can quibble about the implementation of TRACS, and maybe we'll get into that later, but I think that, as Kevin said, the general policy direction is still very good.
Hi, and I am the bridge over troubled water. I have the dubious distinction of a person who helped Kevin and that little engine that could team with our original concept of operations, and in raising awareness about these issues and the credibility of the Department of Commerce such that we made it through the NAPA, study and were able to get the first tranche of money. Then, I also have the dubious distinction of going to the White House, and I must make the distinction that the budget problems from the White House were not from our White House. So please, let's all acknowledge that. To continue the implementation and to crack the whip even before Richard got there. So I have to say that I'm not going to take all the credit, but I'm going to take some credit, and I'm going to take credit from my team at the National Space Council during the last administration, because were it not for us, we wouldn't have the tracks that we have. Love it, like it, hate it, matters not, we have something. So what I want to say is all of that came about because we had this good policy, and let's remember what that policy's it was about taking something from the Department of Defense to allow them to really move out on their mission and moving it over to the civil side, not only because it had benefit for the Department of Defense, but also because it had benefit to the nation and to the international space safety community. And that's because through the Department of Commerce, conversations could be had so that this wasn't going to occur in a vacuum. This could occur in this ecosystem that wasn't just US-centric. It also required money. So let's remember that when we start to relitigate these issues now, and in early days, we were like, should it be the Department of Transportation? Remember that? Should it be the Department of Commerce? We wasted a lot of time on unconstructive back and forth, and I don't want to see us do that now. I really think that I have worked in organizations, before I even came to government, I've worked in organizations where you didn't have top cover or you had a lot of naysayers. Haters be haters. But the bottom line is, you have to focus on the mission. And right now, a lot of taxpayer dollars have been spent to get to this point. And let's see, if you really want to find out how TRAX is going, start talking to the people that are in the pilot program, and let's give peace a chance. So I just want to throw out that this is the time when we need to continue to show support, smart support. We should always keep our pencil sharpened. We should always be looking to be responsible with taxpayer dollars and with our space environment. But it is not the time for us to go, let's just flip-flop again. That's unstable. Let's be grown-ups. Thank you.
So then let's look at the stalemate and understand why it's happening. And I think it's actually more, I think you're seeing budget as policy in this particular case, and there are many other examples of that. I think the signal that I read as a private observer is to simply say that the path we're on is not the path going forward. And so the implementation details are going to be critical. Again, how we did what we did in SPD3. An example that we could raise right now is we've had, as one friend puts it, an almost Talmudic debate about the basic versus advanced pieces of SPD3. And in one interpretation, the government says there are 50 things that space operators need, and the government's going to do 48 of them. And in another interpretation, you could say, as we talked about many times, you could slap a commerce logo on spacetrack.org, or, more radically, shut down spacetrack.org, including an emergency protocol, of course, that you would put in place. And so that is a debate that has gone on also endlessly, that we need to reconcile now in the direction of the policy.
But TRAX has basic services, and those basic services were chosen with the input from industry. And they're not 48 of the 50 things. And guess what? Those 50 things could become 150 things, because we're an innovative bunch of people. And so I think you're right. I think a lot of it has to do with the basic and the advanced. And I think that gets to what is the governmental function, right, as opposed to what is something that should be monetized, could be monetized. So I think that those discussions are a little premature, since we're still at that handoff part. Let's make sure that we do no harm and that it works. It's a more agile system. It was built differently. It might be doing pretty much what SpaceTrack is doing, but it's doing it better and more responsively. It's refreshing more often. It can answer inquiries in a different timeline than SpaceTrack can. So I think I was very pleased yesterday. I went to the briefing that TRAX gave, and I got to see the presentation there, and I'm so happy that I did. Good job, Slingshot. But I will also say I didn't hear a lot of talk about commercial, and I was a little bit, But then I did hear about the fact that the sandbox has made it through like the different iterations. That's good. So my thought is we are still early days, and there is still a possibility that that sandbox can be used, give access to the private sector and academia to innovate and to test, and then don't turn that into more products and basic services. No, monetize them, make it an app store, make it something so that all that other fantastic, innovative, advanced stuff, there's your ecosystem. Having a company take it on, or having a few companies try to figure out how to make their things interoperable, sounds pretty chaotic. Right now, we are seeing what disruption looks like. Is that really what we want?
I think, look, I've defended the TRACS program from this stage, I think 3 years in a row, and so let me do it again. We were very much aware of what SPD 3 said, and we were also very interested in the question of what is the role of government here. And where we ended up was, look, this is a safety service. We can have a discussion later about, you can always, like we have an air traffic control network. It's manned by government employees. Canada has an air traffic control network that is manned by contractors. There's nothing religious about this. You can make either work. The question is, who has the ultimate responsibility? And where we ended up was the ultimate responsibility falls with the government. And so and that was brought home to us because some of the biggest challenges of space traffic coordination are international. How are we aligning with all the other SSA systems in the world? What are we doing in our dialogue with China and Russia and India and others who aren't fully participating in the SSA data exchanges? So those are big issues that are really beyond a company's ability to manage. And so we drew the line where we drew it, saying, look, this is day one. We want a system that works and a system that's safe. In the future, if you want to privatize this, you certainly could. And I think I've always thought that that issue was less important than it's often made to be. There's also another big piece here, which is where are we going with regulation? You know, the initial OMB passback, or was it a passback, or was it initial budget? In any case, the original OMB language said, just turn tracks over to the private sector. Well, okay, how are you going to do that? Are you going to charge satellite operators? You don't have the regulatory authority to do that. The EU, I know Pascal is up next on the next panel. The EU Space Act does suggest that all operators should have an SSA system, and I don't think it goes much deeper than that. But I think there's this bigger issue, which is, what is the future of space regulation going to look like, and what role does SSA play in it? Are you mandating anything? Will operators have to pay for SSA services, or do they just have to have a flight dynamics team that meets a certain level of qualification? There's so many uncertainties that this is going to take years to sort all this out. In the meantime, I think TRACS is a good, important first step.
I'm going to jump in again. You make a really good point that this is something that's ongoing, and we heard General Saltzman say that on Wednesday. We are in a very dynamic field, and we're not going to solve it and then it's one and done. It will always be, there will be new iterations. It's going to be that. And I will make one other comment, and that is, listening to both of you gentlemen, you know, the commercial integration piece, it's hard. We see, you know, the formerly Defense Department struggling with this, and they have been for many, many years. It's a very similar issue here, but it's not one that we need to solve this minute. What we need to do is be having these conversations and thinking about how we build that ecosystem, because we want the innovation, and how we do it in a way that's good bang for the buck for the taxpayer.
I'm just worried that if it really still is early days, it's very late in the evening of the early days, and that is very much, you know, when you hear
Fair point.
When you hear everything from the stage here about how the space environment has changed, we're running out of time, And one of the tools we have, it's not a question of saying that a company can do this. And we've heard people say, just like Rich just suggested in the original OMB message, just turn it all over to the private sector. There is a transition to do that that has a very holistic look at what can you all do. Part of the narrative I've heard in the past is, well, industry doesn't have exactly what we want, so we don't need to do anything in this area. I was delighted to hear General Saltzman talk about the Corona program. I'm not that old, but I did work on the Corona declassification. And occasionally I think to myself, if we'd gone to President Eisenhower and said, gee, Lockheed Martin doesn't have something called an imaging satellite, so we ought to skip the idea or not go to industry, we'd be in real trouble. There's a different, more traditional way of dealing with industry to bring them in on an experimental basis. I'm a big fan of competition in this space. Let companies qualify for the mission pieces. But where there are still gaps, the government should fund industry to actually move the ball down the road and ultimately achieve a capability where the bulk of the mission is in commercial hands.
Well, and I think that there are some very, very fair points there. One thing I'll say, when I say early days, I mean early days for tracks as we now know it. And there were a lot of delays, and a lot of those delays were acquisition delays. We suffered through the early parts of that, and I know you all suffered because I was the one that was cracking the whip and saying, well, why more time? No, we want... That said, I think that would lead to more delay, not less. And I think that would lead to more confusion, and I don't think that's healthy. And I do believe that nothing is stopping the community that's developing more and more capabilities. Some things are, free on certain, providers' platforms, which is a wonderful thing. There's awareness. Things are starting. USST wasn't even here 5 years ago in the way that it is now. So it is maybe not as dire, Henny Penny. Maybe we should stop wringing our hands and look for what is working, what's good. And you're right, there are ways to fund. So maybe that's a redistribution of some of how we spend the funds. I also want to make one point. The funding for OSC is not all tracks. Some of that is for the other two pillars. So let's remember that when we support OSC. There is advocacy, and that advocacy should be working for the SSA provider community, as well as, buying from them, contracting with them to do pieces of it. And then there's also the regulatory piece, and that is, I can tell you, not a light lift. So, and I think that there's a tie-in, and this is another reason why I think it's really important to keep an iteration of tracks continuing, because there is definitely utility to having the SSA function and the supervision piece of mission authorization and supervision in the same place, because you can use a lot of what we do for SSA to monitor compliance, to figure out where things are. It doesn't have to be regulation heavy. You don't have to front load it with requirements necessarily. You can give standards and then you can check to see that they're met. And that requires less enforcement authority from Congress, since that isn't so quick to get.
I think the part of SPD3, which is always, I think, the most controversial, is what does it mean to support the SSA industry? And Kevin, you're a veteran of these battles on the imagery side. When it's always a little bit out of form for the U.S. government to say we're going to build an industry. I mean, there's no similar initiative to build a satellite communications industry, but we have initiative that said, well, we should support the SSA industry, and now NASA is saying we should support the low Earth orbit. So it's always a weird position for the government. What does that actually mean in our system for funding? And a lot of times, like at NGA, that manifests itself as the government becoming a major buyer. And so it's hard to immediately translate. Given the nature of the current SSA system, it's a little bit hard to do an immediate translation that looks like the NGA solution, where you say, well, the government's just going to do $500 million worth of acquisition a year in commercial SSA. It doesn't really fit in the same way. And I think it has been a problem since the beginning of the program. And also the question is, I mean, SPD3 said, well, you should support the SSA industry, but why do we do SSA? We do SSA for the industry. Actually, the principal industry that we're supporting is the satellite communications industry. And that is, unfortunately, nowhere identified in SPD3. So it's a little bit of that part of it's been a little bit of a muddle for years.
Yeah, so I mean, a larger discussion, but I think as we look across the history of space commercialization, we tend to relearn these lessons in every single domain, and that's not healthy. It takes time to do it. They are different, obviously, and so we need to pay attention to that specifically. I think the other part of this that we're not achieving yet is that there are in industry services that are envisioned, what were affectionately known as the advanced services. Because we're in a disruptive space environment, there are a whole host of other new services that are envisioned that can be provided by industry that we're not getting to because we're still sort of stuck in this basic versus advanced construct.
I do think Ian has a question. Ian, do you have something
right now?
Questions?
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
we do
Move
have
for that
audience
time
questions.
pass.
I don't know if you wanted to keep having a great conversation. I don't know if you wanted any quick last. Yeah, no.
Go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry, my apologies, Diane.
All right. Yeah, so the first question I'd like to ask is actually kind of a not moderator's perspective, prerogative, but moderator's prerogative. One of the words that we constantly hear around SSA and space traffic coordination is the importance of trust, right? You have to trust the data, you have to trust the source of the data, you have to trust, if you're international, that if you're using SpaceTrack, that data is, a trusted source, right? One of the questions I have about the proposal to privatize track services, can we ask non-U.S. folks or other commercial operators to trust data that comes solely from a private source? Is there a trust issue that we'd have to be worried about if we go fully private on basic services?
I mean, there is some good work going on. There's been discussions here about international standards. I mean, OSC, and by the way, you said something a minute ago. There's no greater set of advocates for OSC than the group that's on this stage, by the way. But the work on international standards and companies' abilities to comply with that should be a basis of trust.
But I think, I have a few different observations about that. I think one of the reasons that TRAX looks the way it does was because of a trust issue between what was formerly known as the Department of Defense and the Department of Commerce and what this should look like. But there are a lot of mechanisms to help us with trust. I mean, you're right. There have been a lot of papers and things. But I think when we talk about some of the governmental functions that are, I think, attached to this mission for OSC, I think developing the different kinds of standards that vet, which I think is going to be useful for the advanced services as well as for the basic services. And I think that adds to the interoperability element because whatever we have, we want to work with what others have.
I mean, I agree. There are kind of multiple levels to the question of can you trust data, right? So part of the reason that TRAX ran a series of Pathfinder programs was to kind of validate the capabilities, the commercial capabilities and the other capabilities that were available to it. And so there was a validation part of that. We also engaged in a very deep dialogue with our colleagues in Europe at EUSST, and the goal there, of course, one of the goals there was to understand how they worked and whether the results we were getting were the same with sometimes differing data. And so there's a bunch of detailed work that has to be done. But going to the top, at the 30,000 foot level, we are going to live in a world where there are multiple SSA systems. We probably are not going to be living in a world where the Chinese are sharing basic observations. So to some extent, we've got to solve these problems without being concerned about what data are they starting with. So that takes us down a different path to how are you comparing the results of different systems and what is good enough. So I think there's kind of a policy level answer to that, but there's also a really deeply technical issue that you have to resolve.
And if I might add, what is good enough and where you can get better if you want or need it.
All right, thank you. So turn here to an audience question. So the question is, what has changed in the DOW to the point that they aren't worried about being distracted from the SDA mission in 2025 like they were back around the time of SBE3? So I think it relates to the proposals to move some of the functions back to the DoD and why that might not be a mission concern.
If anything, now would be a time when we would want to distract them less. If anything, this is a time, more and more, when we need to free them up to do what they do, you, and work on the civil space safety mission.
From which all parties benefit.
All parties.
Including the military.
Exactly.
Fully agree with this.
Yeah.
The case is as compelling as ever for them to focus on the space domain awareness mission and have a competent authority on this side doing the civil space safety mission. It being the Commerce Department, by the way.
Yeah, I think we have.
I don't want to open that. I don't want to open that door again.
Right. All right.
No. No, exactly.
All right, quick one, Kevin. This is directed at you. You use the words emergency protocol. What would you think that would be? In this?
Simply to say, if you were going to shut down spacetrack.org, you would want to have some provision that an emergency protocol exists for any scenario a responsible actor would be able to communicate with another responsible actor. Again, we've talked about that in different forums here this week.
All right.
Yeah, because that sounds so practical.
Yeah, I get a debate about what that is versus the basic.
Got to come up
right?
with it.
Yeah. All right. So with the 2 minutes and 45 seconds remaining, I think this one may be for each of you to take your perspective on. We are in a place where the administration talks about U.S. leadership and the importance of U.S. leadership and putting our position out there in the world, right? If we step back from a civil space traffic management coordination function like TRAX, does that impact U.S. leadership in this global competitive environment?
Of course it does.
Amen. Yes.
And I think what we saw last year out of the UN were, there was established in the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space an expert group to start doing a deep dive on the SSA issue. If the U.S. takes a big step back, or even if the U.S. declines to lead and is just going to follow, if it doesn't show up for that international dialogue, we will be the poorer.
We cede our position. And I could see it when I was at legal subcommittee and there was space traffic well, they didn't even call it coordination or management, just space traffic was at issue, and putting together not the expert group, which is an STSC, Science and Technical Subcommittee, but also a working group to work on some of the legal implications thereof. And the U.S. was much more laid back than in other years when I was, there with a bunch of my colleagues out there in the audience, and we were working on long-term sustainability. So I would really hate to see us cede that position.
All right, thank you. Well, I think with a minute left, I'm not sure I want to try another question here, so I think give you a chance to, if you have any, this last.
I think a good question is, given where we are today, to my panelists, where do you think we'll be next year when this conference happens? What's your guess, based on your deep knowledge of the political system of the United States government?
Back when I was in the fashion industry, I used to go to sales conferences, and they used to ask for predictions about, what's your territory going to do next year? And my daughter was really little, and I found this toy. It was like a Merlin in a globe, and you would wave your hand over, ask a question, wave your hand over, and it would give you like one of these crazy, like, absolutely, or there's no turning back. And I think I need Merlin to be here to answer that question right now. Because I think it's an uncertain world, which is kind of good, because lots of good things can happen, as well as lots of bad things can happen.
So let's take a swing at this. I think if we're here a year from now, we will have seen, the phrase I use is re-baselining, and I think we need to re-baseline in two areas. we need to fully understand what industry can do with a 2025 lens on that, okay? That's not a 6-month effort. It's a very quick survey of what industry can do and where private investments, because this is often about privately funded companies, private invested companies, where are they headed with their investments? Point number one. The second rebaselining, and I'll go back to it again, is what should the government actually providing given the survey results from that first effort? In other words, what has to be a basic service? And again, I think we should close quickly and not continue to debate that, but tip in favor of things that industry is doing. Again, back in the imagery world, remember that in the early days of satellite imagery, we told the companies, oh, just go do the simpler missions like agriculture, for example, okay? Now we have prima facie use of satellite image, commercial satellite imagery in presidential intelligence, okay? So let's not take 30 years to go through that path again in this particular area. Let's rebaseline the government requirements, but then let's also rebaseline what industry can do. Sorry.
I'm going to add one serious piece to that, and that is also let's work for some stability. And let's work to be supportive of the efforts and all the good work that's gone to get us where we are with tracks and also with our commercial providers and help support them as they develop their markets.
I think next year the new political director of the Office of Space Commerce will be sitting here talking to you about the amazing accomplishments of the TRACS program, and all of this, most of what we are anguished over today will be forgotten.
Don't you mean Assistant Secretary?
Yes, the Assistant Secretary for
Exactly.
Space.
All right. With that, thank you to the three of you. I think that was a very fascinating
everybody.
conversation.
Well done.